Hey, it's Katie Moran. Here's your heartfelt lift. Today I'm here with.
Zoe Magnetic.
Thank you so much for being here. So I love this story about how you left a toxic relationship, quit your job, and booked a flight to Australia all within 2 weeks. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so this story is actually you could say it's pretty much the beginning of when I really started diving into my own self-love and really prioritizing myself after, years and years of putting other people ahead of me and kind of burning myself to the point where drastic measures had to be taken. I'm not
Hmm.
sure how much more drastic it can get than, leaving a toxic relationship, quitting my job, and then booking a flight. Um, but yeah, so basically, I had always been perceived as, and I think the persona that I put forward was that I was someone who was super confident, and had a lot of self-worth. But inside, I really struggled with that. And I really relied on the approval of others to kind of meet that need for me, for years and for years and for years. And um, at the end of 2017, I got into a relationship that I would eventually find out was very toxic, with someone who was fairly controlling. And the way that I knew that both he was controlling and my self-worth was maybe needing some work,
Hmm.
um, was when anytime there would be any point of conflict or disagreement or even any difficult topic that needed to be brought up, um, I would be walking on eggshells, and I would try to bring it up to have a conversation, and his response would always be to break up with me right on the spot. So I started living in fear of losing him or losing the relationship, especially because a lot of promises were made. We're going to have this life together and we're going to do that and blah, blah, blah. And so I had a lot of attachment. Um, and so every time he would threaten the relationship or break up with me, I completely would self abandon, and I would enter a state of like desperation to the point where I would, totally ditch what I needed to talk about or the thing that I wanted to bring up. And I would just kind of beg and say, "Oh my gosh, what can I do to change your mind? Anything to stay in the relationship." And then eventually he would kind of go, okay, I guess we don't need to break up if you change this, this, and this about yourself. And I
Hmm.
would kind of go, okay, yeah, done deal. I'll change this. I'll change that. Anything you need. Okay, fine. We can get back together. Okay, great. And then that's kind of the pattern that went on for, over 2 years, which is kind of crazy in hindsight.
Hmm.
But when your self-worth is really not where it needs to be or not where it could be, you do settle for things like that. And that's completely where I was at with my relationship with myself. Um, yeah. And then one day in the middle of 2019, so almost 2 years after the relationship had started, I had a lot of family stuff going on, and the same pattern happened. We had this silly disagreement, and I brought something up, and he threatened the relationship, but I was so burnt out from other things that I couldn't abandon myself any further than I already had. So he threatened the relationship, he broke up with me, and then I kind of said, "Oh, okay, then I guess we're broken up." It was the first time I had ever not self-abandoned and said, "No, no, no, what can I change?" And then he freaked out. He said he never meant it every time that he threatened the relationship. And that's when I kind of figured out that the whole facade had been to kind of control me and to kind of nitpick what he could and couldn't change about me to meet his needs. And then the dynamic in the relationship kind of changed. I started becoming a little bit, petty. Like anytime there was an argument, I would kind of say, "Oh, what, are you going to break up with me?" So that's kind of how I knew it was the beginning of the end. So that continued for, I don't know, a couple months until, it got to that point where I was in a I was working a job that I was so burnt out at. I was overworked, I was underpaid, classic corporate. You just completely give yourself to a corporation that does not care about you or your mental health, and you end up giving your soul for barely anything. And I was living isolated from my friends and family. It was just not a good situation. And this relationship was really draining me. So I reached a boiling point,
Mm-hmm.
and I ended the relationship. And while I was leaning on friends at the time to like help me through that and support me through that, I was on a call with a friend, and she kind of like dared me to book a flight to Australia. And I was kind of like, you know what? Here I have been saving money for the last 2 years to put a down payment on a house with this person who I'm no longer with. I might as well do it. I might as well live for myself. I might as well take this trip. And why not? Traveling's one of my favorite things to do. I'm Sagittarius. Who's surprised about that? So I said, sure, you know what? Why not? So I ended up booking the flight for 2 weeks later. Um, and then I thought, well, I guess I have to quit my job too because I'm going to Australia in 2 weeks. So then the next day I woke up, and I was expecting to wake up like in a panic, like, oh my gosh, did I actually just do that? Did I like really book a flight to Australia? This is like a week after I had ended my relationship. So I had like 1 week to adjust to leaving my relationship. Then the next day I woke up and was waiting for that panic to sink in of like, oh my
Mm-hmm.
gosh, like as if you did that, like cancel the flight, like you're still within the 24 hours you can cancel the flight. And then the panic never came. I felt really peaceful about the decision. I felt really calm about the decision. And so then the next day I went into work and gave my notice and was like, yeah, I'm going to Australia. I'm so sorry to let you down. You know what? I actually will never forget, my boss at the time tried to like swindle me and sway my decision. And he sat me down, and I could tell he was trying to say something that would like convince me to stay. And he was like, you know what, Zoe, I think you're really making this decision out of emotion. Like, this is a really emotional decision. And I could tell he was using emotion as like a quote unquote negative thing to kind of get me to stop in my tracks and say, wait a second, I am making an emotional decision. What am I doing? But instead, I like looked him dead in the eyes and I said, you know what? I'm a very emotional person. And you're entirely correct. This is an emotional decision, and it's the right decision. And having emotions and being emotional is not a negative thing. It's actually a very powerful thing. And he was flabbergasted. That was like one of the first times I like stood up for myself in the workplace and was like, you're right, it is emotional. And since when is that a bad thing? And I challenged it, and it felt very empowering. And it was just one empowering decision after the next. Left the relationship. A week later, booked the flight to Australia. The next day or 2 days later, quit my job. And then 2 weeks after that, I was on the flight to Australia. And being from Canada, from North America, Australia is pretty much as far away from Canada as you can go. And as another side detail, I'm the oldest sibling out of 8 siblings, so in a very blended family. So I'm very used to being like someone that my family relies on heavily, and just being that person that people turn to. Being in Australia, it was the first time in my entire life where I was like, I'm just living for me. I don't have to answer to anyone. I'm not in a toxic relationship. I can do whatever I want. I can be whoever I want. And it just kind of set the tone. I got that taste for like living for myself and making decisions, sometimes on the fly. Like, I remember once in 2020, this was now in 2020, early 2020, that I went to Australia. um I was on my way to the airport and I hadn't booked my flight yet, and I was like, oh crap, gotta book my flight. So just like really living in the moment and just doing things for myself, and not feeling like I had to have every detail planned out. I went from being someone who was very high strung, had to have every little detail organized, had like a death grip on control, and really kind of was outside of myself when things weren't, going my way, or when I wasn't in control, to kind of being like, trust, have fun. The more fun I have, the more fun I have. Like, it was just a complete 180. And living for myself that way really allowed me to look at the parts of me that I had been abandoning for years, probably for my entire life. And it gave me an opportunity to connect with myself in a way where I was able to prioritize myself and learn so much about myself and rely on myself and not have to, you know, make myself smaller. So yeah, I appreciate you asking about this story, Katie, because it really was like the starting point of my entire journey. Yeah.
What would you say to someone who is looking to make like that major change in their life to become someone that they're really proud of, but they just aren't certain that any move they make would result in becoming the person they're proud of?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that first and foremost, if you have that intuitive nudge, if you have that gut feeling, if you feel that pull, if you have that desire to be that person or to take that step, it's there for a reason. That voice, that intuition is speaking to you for a reason. Now, ultimately, it's your decision to listen to that voice and to trust it. And trusting yourself is often one of the things, or not trusting yourself is one of the things that can keep us stuck. But if you lean into that self trust, it's not always trusting that you know the right thing to do. Sometimes it's trusting that you'll be able to figure it out, whether you know what to do or not. So I would say, trusting in that intuitive voice and then trusting yourself to either make the right decision or figure it out if you don't make the quote unquote right decision. I personally believe there's no such thing as a wrong decision because it's either the right decision or you figure it out, which then turns it into the right decision. And that's rooted in self-trust. So I would say, lean on your self-trust.
That's so beautiful. Thanks for coming on today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.